Welcome to Triple Sigma episode 7. Joining us, we have a very special guest, Mr. David Sutcliffe. David is a former famous Hollywood actor who has turned into a somatic practitioner. That means don't call him a therapist, but he performs very similar services for his clients. And I know most of the people who we've brought on are hard-charging business executives or high-level professional athletes. But because this show is dedicated to the mind, who better to bring on than Mr. Sutcliffe himself? David, welcome.
That was an excellent introduction. Happy to be here, Alex.
Well, thank you, David. You and I were just talking before we got on. You've gotten out of the United States. You were in Hollywood for 20 years, or in LA, in Austin for a few years. You just made the move to Mexico. Tell us about that, and tell us, did your professional background lead you to kind of lose enfranchisement with American culture? How did that journey go, and how did you end up where you are right now?
Well, I guess there's a short answer and a long answer. I was in LA for 20 years working as an actor, and I loved LA when I was there. But at a certain point, it just became time to leave. And obviously, I was transitioning out of my career as an actor into the career that I'm into now. And I realized I didn't have to be in LA anymore. It was the first time in my life where I didn't have to be in a major city like Toronto, Vancouver, LA, where there's obviously an acting hub. So that was freeing. I ended up going to Austin, Texas for a couple of years, which I loved Austin, but it was also a scene the way LA was. Not a bad thing, not a judgment, but just I was at a different place in my life. And was ready to, something different, a slower pace, different vibe. There's something about Mexico that is very family oriented. It's very grounded. There's a real emphasis placed on beauty and creativity and art. And it's also a very surreal place, strange, odd culture, but beautiful. And I guess there was just something about where I was in relationship to my work that I felt like I needed a different environment to tap into different energies, different things, because I felt like the emphasis on business and success was getting in the way of my work and my creativity. So I wanted to simplify everything and really just kind of feel myself and feel what was it that I wanted to contribute or give or create, separate from all of the messages that I was getting in places like Austin and LA, which is very much driven by success, which is great again, but I'm a little bit older. I'm at a different place in my life, and my wife speaks fluent Spanish, so that also helped. But we toured around Mexico for a little bit and settled on this place. It's absolutely magical, and it has done great things for me. Like I feel myself in a different way here, and new thoughts and ideas and approaches are coming through.
So you describe that very much like an artist who is very in touch with his emotions. And I'm sure, that wasn't something that you were born with to the extent that you've developed it now. For our listening audience, how did your journey go from being an actor who very much had to channel his emotions, but for performative purposes, to being a somatic practitioner? How did that force you to relate to the feelings that you're processing? And then how has that sort of pushed you in a direction where you're able to be professionally successful, yet not in the scene all the time, which wasn't something that you were able to do in your prior lives?
That's a great question. Well, they're both art forms in a way. Acting is obviously an art form, and therapy, to be good at it, there's certainly a science to it, but it really is, it involves a lot of creativity. And there is a kind of art. And I was fascinated with acting, just I think for a lot of reasons that most people are fascinated by it who pursue acting. Is just there's something about dissolving into a character and getting outside yourself and discovering new aspects of yourself. Like it gives you permission to go places inside yourself that you wouldn't ordinarily go. You can go to your rage, you can go to your sadistic side, you can go to your lover side, whatever it is. And that's very exciting, and it's freeing, and it's interesting, and you're working with other people, and you're playing with them, and it's very dynamic, and you're creating something in real time. And it's very alive. It's when you're on a show or a movie that's popular, it's very exciting to know that the work that you're doing is going to go out and millions of people are going to watch it and be impacted by it. So it gives you, there's a kind of an immediacy that like pulls you into the moment. It becomes bigger than you, which is a feeling like we all enjoy, I think, and we're all longing for. Like, I want to be a part of something, I want to dissolve into something that's bigger than me. And so, the best acting, it takes you over and it puts you into this flow state. And that's what everybody is chasing. And now, when you're working on TV and it's scene after scene, day after day, you don't get that all the time. But that's what you're searching for. And as long as you get it in enough moments, it's satisfying. But when I discovered this work that I do, which is called core energetics, this thing that I was after in acting, I found that I could access it more directly through this work, particularly in the way that it was practiced by the woman who ended up being my teacher, Anne Bradney, where you get into a group of people for a weekend or a week. And really, the intention is you don't have to hold back anything. And that's quite an invitation when you think about it, because most of us hold back all the time. And sometimes we hold back consciously and appropriately, because we live in the world and we have to be discerning. But often we hold back in unconscious ways. And that holding back can often limit our effectiveness in the world and our satisfaction in the world. So this was a place where I didn't have to hold back anything. And all the things that I described, like trying on different aspects of myself as an actor, I got to do that times 10 because I wasn't constrained by a script or by a scene or by a mark that I had to hit under the light. It was just this free-form exploration and psychodrama that had a logic to it. I can imagine as I'm describing it, people, sounds like some kind of whacked out therapy. And on one level that it is, but when you're inside it, it has this interior logic that is very dynamic and exciting and creative and feels like there's infinite possibility. There's like you can go anywhere. And so there's a real creativity in it. And it felt like a way that I could get to the truth of something, the truth of who I was, the truth of how I was relating to people, the truth of how I was relating to the world. And that was also very exciting to me. And I, just through the years of study and practice and workshops, I learned so much about myself. And it was shocking, to be honest. I was shocked about the things that were inside me, the emotions, the feelings, the thoughts, and the intensity of them, the intensity of the rage, the intensity of the pain, the intensity of the fear. When I was allowed to express myself in a container that was safe, it took me there. And it it was exciting. And that's where all my energy went, because that's where I felt the most excitement. And I didn't think when I got into it, I was going to leave my acting career, because I had a successful career and I was enjoying it. But as soon as I discovered this work, particularly with this woman, Anne, that's all I really wanted to do. And so I just ended up following it. And then eventually, once I graduated from her program, it just became obvious that this is what I had to do. And I've been following it ever since. And it's confused me. Like I didn't ever really want to be a therapist, but I enjoy it. It's fascinating. I enjoy working with people. Every person is a fascinating puzzle, and trying to help people discover deeper aspects of themselves, unlock their unconscious restrictive patterns. It's deeply gratifying. And I think it's important work in the world, because most of us don't understand how much we are governed by our unconscious emotions. And you're not really as free as you think you are until you understand that. Very often we have pain and fear that we don't want to confront, that we don't want to deal with. And so we end up living our lives and making decisions in a way to avoid those feelings. And so once you know that they're there and you've confronted them, the sort of canvas of your life can expand massively. And there's just much more possibility.
So how do you explain to somebody who maybe went to a lot of schooling, thinks that they're very rational, is in a career where they have to be on, or they feel they have to be on all the time? This type of person, in my estimation, is probably the best candidate as far as can make the most improvement with the least amount of initial work, simply because it's so antithetical to their initial approach to life. But how do you convince that person that this is something that they're missing? And in fact, if they want to lead not just a more productive and more fulfilling life, but just a better life all around, It's not going to come from working an extra 5 hours. It's not going to come from trying harder, doing the same thing that they've done over the last 10 years. It's going to maybe come from approaching solving problems that they may not even realize that they've had with tools that they don't even realize exist.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Fortunately, I don't have to convince too many people of that because generally they come to me
Well, sure.
when they have a sense that there's a problem. But, I did sit down with Andrew Tate, and certainly I would put him in the category of the kind of person you just described. And my pitch to him was, in the places where you don't know yourself emotionally, you're not present. And presence is the most powerful quality you can have as a human being. And so if you're not present, you're not as effective as you can be. And he was persuaded by that pitch. And that helped him sort of go along. I mean, he resisted and, he certainly brought his rational point of view, which is very compelling and it caused me to, rethink some things. Like, therapy's not for everybody. And it's not everybody's going to do what I did, which is dedicate their life to it and spend 4 years going into a workshops and going deep down into it, or, going to ayahuasca ceremonies and all that stuff. Right. But to have some awareness of the fact that you're not always rational, that you are driven by your emotions. And if you put that to somebody, most people understand that in some way because they're in a relationship. And they understand that they get triggered in relationship or there's dysfunction in the relationship, whether that's a romantic relationship or a relationship with their business partner or their employee or their boss, that there's something else going on there that's causing them to have an emotional charge. And that's really the signal, right? That there's something going on there. There's something else governing them. And I think if you can master yourself emotionally, if you can understand what's happening for you in those moments, which is what is happening in those moments, well, essentially you're projecting, right? Which we all do, right? So we're projecting experiences that we had in our past that maybe are unresolved onto the present moment. And that distorts the present moment. It distorts our perception. It distorts how we see the situation. It distorts how the other person sees the situation in relationship to us. And then that makes us less effective at solving the problem because we're not really in the truth of what the problem is. And so my pitch to people is it's very important to understand yourself emotionally, to know when you're sad, to know when you're afraid, to know when you're unconsciously perhaps angry or you're experiencing resentment or you're afraid to ask for what you need. These are skills that can be developed, but if we've been traumatized there, I'll use that word, or we just have issues there. Again, we may not even know that we have a problem. We just know that there is frustration in our life.
How do you think American men are situated as far as understanding their needs and asking for their needs relative to men in other cultures?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it depends on which other cultures. I think men in general are not very good at asking for what they need. I mean, it's not really encouraged, right? There's a kind of, it depends. It depends on. I'll just say this: it depends on the man. But like in general, men haven't been allowed to express their emotions. We've been in survival mode. If you think about America, like, wasn't that long ago that we settled the country, we settled the West. There wasn't time to concern yourself with being sad or unfulfilled. You were just trying to get by. And so that was the correct orientation at that point in time. But now I think as a culture, we're really out of survival mode generally. And so that has created time and space for us to examine ourselves psychologically. And I think that that's happening. I think more and more men are, maybe they're not going to therapy, but they're at least open to the idea that they have emotions that are worth understanding and not everything needs to be rationalized or dominated or, we have to get dominion over everything. I think that can be an effective strategy, but I think it wants to be tempered with something more, I guess, feminine, maybe I'd say. And I think that's the trajectory that we're on currently in the culture. I mean, again, like to bring it back to Andrew, the fact that he sat down with me because he's such an iconic figure in terms of, a certain kind of man. The fact that he even sat down with me twice is a curiosity. Why? Well, there must be some part of his brain, consciousness, that knows there's something about himself that he doesn't understand. And he's curious about it. And I found that fascinating. And I thought that was, for me, a kind of a zeitgeist moment for a certain kind of man. Well, if he's going to sit down with this therapist and in a way open himself up to the questioning, then there must be something to it. And I think that's what's happening in the culture. I think it's great. And I understand the resistance to it because the truth is most therapists are women. 70, 80% are women. I don't think they really understand the male point of view. That was my experience going through my training. Felt completely missed all the time. I thought there was things that they didn't understand, they didn't get to, the things that they were trying to teach me that didn't feel useful to me. And I rebelled against that. And then I think, of course, you have a bias in the education system, which is predominantly orients towards the left and towards the feminine, I would say, in this case. And so I think a lot of men go to therapy and they don't feel seen, they don't feel understood, they don't feel it's useful for them because essentially they're being reflected back a model that is more useful for women. And men and women process emotions very differently and they need different things in therapy.
When did you realize that a lot of our education system, a lot of society is actually created for women and tries to feminize men or force men into assuming female attributes in order to better fit in?
I don't think I consciously realized it until 10 years ago, like really saw it clearly. But if I think back to my years in college at the University of Toronto, starting in 1988, it was all there. Everything was feminized. I was a jock. I was a basketball player. It was fine. The academics, the feminists, they had no problem making fun of jocks. Like we were sort of dismissed, the dumb jock. And that's, it just reveals a certain kind of bias that they have because the jocks on my team were all incredibly smart. I was very smart. And so I didn't like that. Right. And I felt like it was a blind spot and I felt like it reflected their insecurity more than anything. And I felt it was really a limitation. And so that's when I started to understand that institutionally, a lot of people are afraid of powerful men, aggressive men, assertive men, masculine men. And I understand why, because masculine men, those kind of men have done a lot of damage and people have been hurt by them, and particularly by their fathers, And so a lot of it has to do with kind of daddy issues. I hate to make a generalization, but it's the more I do this work, when I look out in the culture and I see everything that's going on with Trump and everything, I'm like, this is all just daddy issue shit. People are just fucking screaming at their daddy. They love their daddy or they hate their daddy, but it's all this projection and transference. And so I think that's a part of it. But I think, obviously there was a systemic intention to demonize powerful men so that women, I guess, or feminized men could gain control. And they used shame and coercion and pointed to all the bad things that they did, not all the good things they did, like, save the world and build civilization.
So I have two theories that I'd love to have you check on. So my one theory on rich communists is I think rich communists are people with daddy issues who see their rich dad get what he wants in situations where other people are not able to get what they want, and their inability to understand why this man who they think is an asshole is continuing to get what he wants, irrespective of the fact that he is mean or emotionally unavailable to them, makes them hate rich people as a class because they think rich people use money to afford them a separate set of rules that everyone else has to play by, but their rich asshole dad does not. What do you think about that?
I think that sounds accurate to me. Makes perfect sense from my framework. Yeah, it is interesting that so many quote unquote communists or far left liberals are rich white women. And you have to ask yourself why. And it seems to me the energy that I feel from their complaint, from their anger, their arguments is resentment. There's some kind of resentment. And I think, obviously, what I said, I think it does point back to the father, so that there was something that they wanted and needed emotionally from their father and didn't get. And so they demonized him in ways that you're describing and then project that onto all men who are like that. And I think this, and anybody who studies communism knows this, we should not underestimate the intensity of the desire for retribution and punishment. it is murderous. There is a murderous rage that exists there. And I say that because I've witnessed it in my workshops. Like, people have a darkness inside them that is almost incomprehensible. I mean, we look out in the world and we see the things that are happening and we can see it, but we don't generally assign it to particular individuals, or certainly we don't think about ourselves that way. But over and over and over again in my workshops, women and men, when you give them permission to go there, yeah, there's a murderous rage, and it has a desire to kill, to annihilate, to inflict pain in the way that they felt pain was inflicted on them. There's a kind of cruelty in it, and it's sadistic, and it wants to dominate and control. That's real. And then it gets, I think it happens on the emotional level, generally within the family, and then gets projected out onto the culture.
Yeah. Now, earlier you mentioned the rivalry or dichotomy between the jocks and the nerds at the University of Toronto. And I've had this theory that somebody's understanding or affinity for Trump is strongly correlated with the amount of time that they've spent in a male locker room, and that jocks will see the way that Trump interacts with people and just look at him as, kind of a blowhard who, like, obviously the things that he says are said for dramatic effect. Whereas people who haven't spent that time bonding with other men or giving shit to other men or getting shit from other men look at that same behavior as bullying or narcissistic or pathological in some way. What do you think about that? And what do you think about Trump derangement syndrome?
No, I think that's exactly right. I was a jock. First, I was a hockey player, then a basketball player. Grew up in Canada playing hockey. It's rough. And so I learned how to navigate in those environments. And there's hazing, there's all the bullshitting and the shit talking, and it's part of it. And there's a lot of humor in it. It's in a way, it's how men bond. I just grab them by the pussy. I mean, when people suggest that's not locker room talk, they've obviously never been in a locker room. And you don't take any of that shit seriously. Guys they're blowing off steam. They're talking shit, and none of it you really take seriously. It's just a way that we connect, but I can understand if you're not inside that world that it does look threatening, because jockey men, they're big, they're strong, they're often confident. Maybe they have some sense of entitlement. And certainly there have been jockey men that have done bad things. And maybe they got bullied in high school by the jock. That happens. That's real. So when they see Trump, that's all they see is that guy that bullied them in high school, the person who was popular, they were obnoxious, they were aggressive, and to them that is terrifying and scary and evil. And I think I understand, I have a lot of compassion in one sense for TDS because of that scenario you just described. They just can't see it. Right. My mother, she has a hard time with Trump in the sense that she doesn't like a lot of the things he says. But my mother also grew up in New York City. She goes, well, New Yorkers, that's just how they talk. Right. So she gives him a free pass because he's a New Yorker. But I think there's a lot of people out there that are not willing to give him a free pass. And then I think I think there are a lot of daddy issues. I mean, Sam Harris's TDS, that to me is 100% daddy issues. And the reason that I say that is because I know somebody went to high school with him. And I said, what was he like in high school? And this is what she said. She said, he was the guy without a dad. That's how he was seen. Like his dad wasn't around. And that really softened me in terms of how I thought about Sam Harris and his obvious derangement towards Trump, because he can't stop talking about it. It's pathological, clearly, but it's probably rooted in some deep disappointment that he had in relationship to his father. I mean, there's a clip going around right now with Gene Hackman on Inside the Actors Studio talking about when his father left when he was 12. And he's telling this story, and he's in his 60s during this interview, and you can see that he's still deeply impacted by what happened. It's still raw. It's still emotional for him, even at 60. So the relationship with our father for men and for women is deep and foundational. And when there's a rupture, or the father's not there, or the father is abusive or tyrannical, and they can't feel his love, therefore they can't feel the safety that the father is meant to provide, that actually leaves a child in a state of terror. They have to disassociate from that terror, but as far as they're concerned, the world is not safe. And fair enough. If your dad is not there to create safety for you as a child and for your mother, the world, you're going to project onto the world that it's not safe because you've never experienced safety. And so I think a lot of that gets transferred onto Trump because he doesn't actually do anything to help people feel safe. That's a legitimate criticism of him, I think. And then, again, I would say that he's the perfect man for the job right now. But, there is a way that he could soften some of the things he said to let people know that he's thinking about how they feel. And so I understand the derangement. I'm sympathetic to it. And at the same time, what's sad is that all of these liberals who claim to be going to therapy or to be interested in mental health have not taken one moment to ask themselves the question, why am I so fucking triggered by this guy?
So if you were the chief psychologist for an authoritarian regime and your job were to create conditions that would maximize the popularity of the regime, what would you do with respect to organized religion? What would you do to either strengthen or weaken the family? What would you do to either popularize or depopularize women's place in the workforce to maximize support as a second order effect for your regime?
Well, all the things that they've been doing, which is playing off people's resentments. Everybody's got resentment, right? Life's not fair. Life is fucking hard. And as soon as somebody gives you gives you permission to be angry about it, that's a relief. It's like, oh, it's this person's fault. It's rich people's fault. It's Trump's fault. It's white men's fault. Whatever it is, it's like, and doesn't just go this way. In the past, it's black people's fault. It's men's fault. It's women's fault. Well, there's always somebody to blame. So you find somebody who's in power that to blame, where people can project their resentment onto, and then you really try to have them identify as a victim. I mean, what I'm trying to do with my work is have my clients disidentify from being a victim, because you're powerless there. As long as you're a victim, you're a slave, right? Like, you're at effect to the world. There's nothing you can do, right? So I'm trying to demonstrate to people that actually, self-responsibility is the best mental model for life, that you essentially create your own reality through your actions, through your thoughts, and that's what you have control over, and that's what you should focus on. But as soon as you're blaming somebody else for your problems and you're identified with a victim, you're actually encouraging people to be powerless. And when they're powerless, you can control them.
And is that distinct from classical therapy or classical cognitive psychology? Because it seems to me that you have people going to therapists year after year who may think that they're making progress, but the fact that they're in the same chair, paying the same person, same money might suggest maybe not. Do you think that the feminized roots in cognitive therapy are actually preventing people from creating an internal locus of control and actually solving the problems that follow them around wherever they go?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to get myself into trouble here, but I think that's exactly right. I don't think it's necessarily conscious. I mean, first of all, therapy has been infected by ideology, which is not a good thing. Therapists are talking about the patriarchy and DEI and all of these things. None of that should be in therapy, as far as I'm concerned, right? You're dealing with a person's psychology, and you have to account for the environment and for the structures of society that because we're impacted by that. But I think in general, the feminine orients to compassion and understanding. And so certainly when I have somebody sit down in front of me and they're telling me their story, and I'm listening to the story, the first thing that I'm going to do is affirm their feelings, right? Like, I understand why you'd feel that way. And that's an important part of the therapeutic process. You have to give them what they call unconditional positive regard. We need to have our feelings validated and understood and felt in order to feel safe. And so I'm trying to give them that from a genuine way. You can't argue with how somebody feels. Now, the story they're telling themselves about why this happened is, really what the issue is. And that's the distortion you're trying to clear up. Because ultimately, it's like we're co-creating the dynamic, right? If you continue to date crazy, quote unquote, crazy women, Well, why are you continuing to date crazy women? I'm not going to sit here and listen to you complain about women session after session. I'm eventually going to call you out and say, this is your problem, right? Same as a woman coming in saying that she's dating assholes all the time. It's like, well, why are you attracted to assholes? Like, you're making that choice, right? And what is that about? And that's the frame that I want to work under to help them deconstruct that and get to the root of it, so that they can be empowered to make better choices. I think there's an intention for a lot of therapists to do that, but it requires challenging sometimes the client in a way that is uncomfortable. And the client unconsciously wants to be affirmed. They want their feelings to be understood. And I think that too much of that is a problem. And I think there's a lot of therapists out there that are doing too much of that. And because that's reinforced in the culture right now, particularly on the left, it feels like it's the right thing to do. It's the correct thing to do, but it's completely disempowering for humans. And that's the reason that these people are going to therapy for years and not getting better, because they're not taking responsibility for their lives or for the actions or for the results that they're getting.
So I think everything that you say sounds completely sane, but to somebody who hasn't quite consumed the Kool-Aid that we have, what radicalized you?
Radicalized me. Well, I guess the first thing I was in Hollywood in 2008. I got totally hooked into Obama. I was just like rah, rah, rah. And then the economic collapse, and then he just gave all that money to the banks. Just wrote a blank check to the banks. And I was like, what? You're writing a blank check to the banks, bro? I just felt that was a kind of betrayal. And then I started hearing some other things, and then I was like, okay, this guy, he's kind of a phony. I mean, I still appreciated him. And then I started thinking we need somebody less buttoned down. I'm like, we need a wild man. And I just intuitively, I wasn't even thinking about Trump. But then when Trump came on the scene, what happened for me was, I'm reading the newspaper like everybody else or online, and I'm seeing these headlines about like crazy shit that Trump had said. And I was like, what the fuck? And then I would go watch the clip. And it's like, that's not what the fucking guy said at all. Like, it's just a total lie. And I saw that over and over and over again from outlets at the time that I thought were reputable, like CNN, like the New York Times, like the Washington Post. And I was like, what the fuck is going on here? And that's when I started to realize like this whole thing was a charade, and that clearly Trump must be the one telling the truth, or otherwise they wouldn't have to lie about him in that way. And then I started paying attention to really at the essence of the things that he was saying, and realized that he was right about a lot of things, and he was directionally accurate. Just his basic, his basic philosophy made sense to me. And then I started to see all the other stuff. I mean, the transgender was just immediately fucking insane to me. And the fact that you couldn't ask questions, right? Like, you couldn't talk about it. That's always the tell. Like, we're going to shut you down. We're going to shame you for questioning it. And I went through a whole, journey, because I was, I came from Hollywood. I still had lots of friends there. I was living in LA. And then I went into a kind of a therapeutic community, which is, it's all liberals. And I was kind of the lone man saying, actually, I think Trump is right, and I think the left is insane and getting more insane. And I was just asking questions. And then I just got annihilated, like over and over again by people who I thought were my friends, like family, like I just was like, something is going on. Like, we've been living in a delusion, and I was in the delusion, and this guy is essentially cracking the delusion. Fake news. Yeah, the news is fucking fake. I didn't know that. I assumed the news was real. This guy's fake news. And then you look into it and you're like, yeah, this is all bullshit. It's all propaganda, which was, it was disheartening for me, because I'd bought into it. It was like getting out of a cult that you believed in. And so it wasn't an easy thing for me. And so I have compassion for people who are still, what I would say, in the cult, because think about what it is, Alex, to have to come to terms with that. Like, what you have to actually face to realize, that your whole world would be shattered. And so I have compassion. At the same time, I don't want to give them any power because they're deranged.
Right. Well, so I look at emotional and mental or cognitive limitations very similarly to the way, as a certified personal trainer, I look at physical limitations, in the sense that if you have an injury, you'll have inflammation around the injury, you'll have reduced mobility around the injury. And if you've had that injury long enough, you'll have atrophy of the tendons, ligaments, muscles around the affected area, so that if you were to snap your fingers and say, your injury is healed, go play, that person would actually be at greater risk for injury by exposing untrained parts of his body to the elements. And when I look at people who believe the news is real, who believe that Harvard is the center of academic progress, who believe that the Democratic Party is the party of science, I don't think that there's a clear way that anybody can usher these people out from the outside. I think it has to be a personal journey that they take one step at a time, and it has to be a very particular type of person who notices the cognitive dissonance that they're feeling and wants to dig deeper around that cognitive dissonance. Because most people, when they experience cognitive dissonance, it's just like they had a hard rep in the gym and they don't want another one. They want to back away from whatever that hard thing was because it made them feel uncomfortable. And so do you even think that it's safe for a meaningful percentage of these TDS victims, TDS patients, to actually have sane thoughts immediately? Or do you think that a meaningful percentage of them are so far gone that they're crazy now, but they would be even crazier if they realized the truth?
That's a great question. I think some people are too far gone. They're not coming back. My wife and I talk about this all the time because, we're both aligned, and it's very regularly. We're just like, what the fuck is going on? Because we've lost so many friends, and I don't mean that we're not friends with them, but there's just no real relationship or connection anymore in terms of how we see the world. We may be friendly, but it'll never be the same. And it just feels like there are some people that are too far gone, and they're never coming back. And maybe that's true, but I agree with your assessment. Like, somebody, I think, has to come to it on their own. Like, and I get a lot of people come to me, right? Because I'm a curiosity, because I was an actor, because I'm a therapist, and because generally people think of me as a compassionate person. They're very confused by the fact that I, support Trump and push back against the liberal narratives. So I've had many people come to me and ask questions, and I'm proud to say that I've red pilled quite a few, but they had to come to me. Right? There was some opening. There was some sense that they weren't seeing something clearly, or they were being lied to somehow. But in general, somebody has to put themselves in that position, and I think it has to happen very, very slowly. I think the way in is to just, historically understand that the media, you just have to, the logic of it. They're in the business of lying. And now it's not even necessarily nefarious, but everybody understands that the algorithm is set up to get clicks, right? And they use outrage to get those clicks. So there's a bias that the algorithm has. Well, the news is the exact same fucking thing. So they're going to be giving you a certain kind of information that's going to provoke you emotionally. And just that way in, like just having a little question about the validity of what it is they're reading in the New York Times or what it is they're watching on CNN, separate from the lies about Trump and separate from the fact that they're essentially a propaganda arm of the liberal party, just that the news is not what you think it is. I think that's the way in. And it's very hard for people to deny that because it's a business and businesses have to operate in a particular kind of way. They have to get ratings. They have to stay on the air. They have advertisers. And that's the way that I've sort of bridged the gap with some people, getting them to the next phase, which is that they're, it's a propaganda machine for the establishment. That's a little bit of a harder pill to swallow.
Yeah, I think recently you've had, I guess, Elon Musk and others, kind of shed light or shed humor on the fact that there's all these people who think that they're rebels. Their loudest cries are the same cries as that which come from the mainstream media and pharmaceutical companies. But I think that's actually that's actually an ingenious strategy that has been created by the shepherds of the left, where they realize that the people on the left actually fancy themselves as rebels.
Yeah.
And so if you have a demographic that believes themselves to be rebels, but does not have the stones about them to actually rebel, then you need to create a synthetic rebellion that gives them the emotional impact of fighting against a machine, but actually has their actions aligned with what your regime wants.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's perfect. I think liberals in general are probably more agreeable. I think you and I are probably less agreeable human beings. And just by nature, I mean, I score very high in being disagreeable. And so it's easier for me and you to like look at something and say, that's fucking bullshit. What the fuck are you talking about? But most people, particularly women, are very agreeable. And so they want to get along. And so they're easy to manipulate because they want to get along. And then they're, because it's tribal, right? We want to stay connected to the tribe. And because it's safe to stay connected to the tribe. And I'm a good person if I stay connected to the tribe. And the bad person is the one who's disrupting everything. And from their point of view, I can understand it. And that is, you need that energy, right? Like you need agreeable people in the world. You can't have all disagreeable people, right? Or it would just be absolute chaos. So there's a way that I respect them and I want to honor like, who they are at their core, this kind of, and also this feminine essence that prioritizes connection over truth, which I think is a big topic. But I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah. Well, just that agreeable people are easy to manipulate. They're also easy to shame. And that, I think, is the tactic that they use most forcefully, is that if you don't agree, we're going to point to, we're going to make you bad. And that is something that most people cannot tolerate. Being made bad because you are a racist, because you are a transphobe, because you are homophobic, whatever reason you're bigoted, that goes against their idealized self-image and it threatens their connection to the tribe. And they can't tolerate it. They can't push back against it. And, I think, again, guys like you and me, it's like, I see it for what it is. I don't buy into it. It's like, fuck you. You're trying to manipulate me. I'm not a racist. But for a lot of people, they're very easily controlled there. And that is just, I mean, I think that's the biggest red pill that I've had to face, is just how dark the political system is and how much it's all just a Game of Thrones and it's at all costs. So we're willing to manipulate and control and terrorize an entire group of people to maintain control of this system.
Yeah.
That is so fucking dark to me.
Well, this kind of reminds me of one of the last arguments I had with my dad on politics, and we try our best to not talk about politics now. But he's very upset that the Republicans are trying to dismantle the social safety net, as he sees it, that they are anti-union, as he sees it, and my pushback to him was everything is a corporation. A union is a corporation is a corporation, and a government is a corporation. And so if the people prefer to be led by a corporation, as opposed to a government as a corporation, as opposed to a union as a corporation, does it not mean that as messed up and as manipulative as private multinational corporations are, isn't it reasonable to think that they're the least corrupt of the corporate union political party trio? And that just enraged him, that I could even compare, it was like a sacrilegious comment.
Yeah.
As far as he was concerned, that I was calling the things that he sees as the only answer to possibly fight corporate power is government power and union power. And I just said they're the same thing. It's just, the same beast with a different head.
Yeah, I of course would agree with that. I mean, I have a far left liberal friend and we get into it all the time around this. And I've said essentially exactly what you said, and he can't hear it. And I think there's some idea that they're connected to around like good and bad, like, and that there's a good way and a bad way. And it feels to me very sophomoric, like Marvel movie, and a denial of the basic human instinct that we're all acting in our own self-interest. Even when you're being generous, at its core, you're acting in your own self-interest, and that life is essentially a kind of marketplace. And I think there's something that's too stark about that for them to contemplate. I see it right now, with what's going on with Putin. Like, Putin's bad. And I'm always like, why? Well, he kills people. It's like, well, the Russian people love him. And the alternative would probably be a worse killer. And we also kill people all the time. What are you talking? Like, in what world can you make him worse than we are? And it's because it's all relative to me. But I think there's a lot of people can't get out of that mindset. And the kind of morality that's attached to it. Not that I don't believe in morality, but there is a place beyond right and wrong and good and bad, like that is operating in the world that you have to come to terms with if you want to see the machinations of politics and just reality clearly. And I think there is a refusal to do that.
I look at the ability to think for yourself as a huge asset and a huge liability as well, because if you look at who are the people who are most likely to be ostracized by their tribe in primal times, it's the people who are smart enough to realize that the leaders were selfish, right? And so if you don't realize that the leaders are selfish, then your likelihood of rising to power is going to be limited. But if you do realize that the leaders are selfish, your likelihood of being expelled from the group massively increases. And so you end up having a small percentage of a group that kind of understands what's going on, and a vast majority of them kind of go along to get along and create a narrative in their own mind that justifies what's happening above them. And I'm sure, you've studied many organizations where the cult leader at the top, whether he's actually a cult leader or he's simply a CEO or simply a president of a group, he gets away with behavior that no other person in the group could get away with. And then all the other group members rationalize why it's okay that this charismatic person did what he did. And this happens over and over again with people, to the point where you can't just assume that it's random. It's actually programmed into our psyche.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. Orion Tarabond, he's a great clinical psychologist. He's got a great YouTube channel, and I've been reading his book, and he talked about awareness, this concept of awareness, self-awareness, like being aware of what it is we're doing, how we're acting in the world, and that sometimes it's a disadvantage because it impedes, it can stop us from acting, and the information actually it can freeze us in a way and cause complication. So yeah, I think it is built in, but I also think, and this is the woo-woo part of me, I think we are going through a kind of evolution of consciousness, some kind of evolution, whether it's technological. I mean, you see it with Bitcoin, how it's shaping the way that people see and understand money. Obviously, AI is shaping how we think, and all of the technology. But I also think there's a consciousness is always evolving, as human beings are always evolving. So I think there is something happening where we are becoming more aware of who we actually are. And so some of the games that we've been playing with ourselves, some of the distortions, some of the illusions that we've been living in, which were useful and necessary for their time, are losing their utility, and we're waking up to something different. I don't think any of us know exactly what that is yet, but the fact that we're having this conversation, and lots of people are having this conversation, and that there is a way that we're trying to understand ourselves in deeper ways. Again, whether it's through technology, that is a way to understand ourselves. I'm going to create a machine that mimics the human mind as a mirror for myself, which will allow me to better understand myself. That is a mechanism for consciousness raising, just the same way as going to an ayahuasca ceremony or coming to one of my workshops. So something is happening. And I think there are a group of people that are going along and are excited by it. And then I think there are a group of people who don't understand it and are terrified of it and are doing everything they can to resist it. And again, I can understand why.
So if I'm somebody who wants to get a greater understanding of myself and better awareness of myself, and I'm interested in what you've been saying, I know that it's something that I've kind of neglected for the last decade or more of my life, where would you recommend I begin? How can I perhaps join some of the programs that you've put on? What would be the best way for me to start?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, you should come to one of my programs. That's a great place to start. I have a organization, School for Kings, I call it. And, but it's a bit of a facade. It is that, but we go pretty deep in there. The main program in there is called Emotional Mastery. And basically I'm helping men to understand themselves in a deeper way. It's just as simple as that. Exactly what you said. My pitch to them is I'm going to help you map your psyche and understand like why you think the way you think, and why you're getting the results you're getting, that it's all emotional based. And that's the pitch that I'm making. And if you understand yourself emotionally, you're going to be more powerful and more free. And I think most people generally, they get that. They have some intuition that that's probably true. So that's a great place to start. I think an easier way in for some people is through the evolutionary psychology and the evolutionary biology. As I said, this guy Orion Taraban, he's fantastic. That's somebody that I've been paying attention to. That really gets into the mechanism of behavior, and that there's something that's very tangible about that. And that you're observing human beings the way you'd observe apes in the wild, and you're understanding how they behave without judgment because they're apes. And can we look at ourselves that way, that we're essentially primates that are behaving? And if we don't judge those behaviors, if we eliminate shame and understand that we just have patterns and impulses and desires and wants and needs that we're trying to get met in the world, and that we have strategies to do that, and you could just look at yourself that way without any of the pretense, without any of the illusion, that will actually go a long way to set you free. Now, you can go beyond that, as I said, really getting into the mechanisms of your psyche, understanding how your shadow works, because that's the trickiest part, is to really come into confrontation with the shadow aspects of ourselves. And certainly you hear Jordan Peterson talking about this all the time, and that's really the foundation of the work of Carl Jung. That's a deeper kind of exploration, not necessary for everyone, but if you really want to go deep, I mean, that's where I'd start, is with the shadow work. Like, am I willing to know myself in my darkest places? Because
yeah, that's awesome. And if I want to learn, if I want to consume more David Sutcliffe content online, what is the best social platform to find your thoughts and your teachings and your wisdom? Yeah. Well, that's awesome, David. I really appreciate you coming on to the Triple Sigma podcast. If you liked what David had to say, of course, please like and subscribe. And until next time, we'll see you later. Cool.
man.
See.